In post-Soviet Russia, Lenin is no longer the hero he was. But on air bases like Kubinka, just outside Moscow, there is another hero that is unlikely to be toppled in the way so many statues of Lenin have been. It is the Mig-21, the great Soviet fighter of the 60s, the best of the world's third-generation jet fighter aircraft. The Mig-21 served in 45 countries around the world. More than 8,000 were produced. Many of them are still flying, and Western countries are offering to install new electronics and avionics so they can operate into the 21st century. NATO code-named it Fishbed, but more than 20 variants were produced, and the English alphabet was nearly exhausted, adding A's and B's and other letters after the name to distinguish between them. The first Soviet premier after Stalin's death was Georgy Malenkov. One of his first actions to make headlines in the West was the denunciation and firing of his deputy premier, Lavrenti Beria, who had run Stalin's secret police. The new general secretary of the Communist Party was war veteran Nikita Khrushchev. In 1955, Marshal Nikolai Bulganin replaced Malenkov as premier. War veteran Marshal Zhukov was defense minister. Bulganin could not have reached office without the support of Nikita Khrushchev, who was consolidating his own position as the most powerful man in the Soviet Union. In July 1955, just a month after the Eastern Bloc countries signed the Warsaw Pact, their formal alliance against the NATO countries, a Big Four summit was held in Geneva. President Eisenhower there suggested an open sky policy in which the Soviet Union and the United States could share defense information, but this was not adopted by the summit. Since the late 40s, America and the Soviet Union had been locked in a weapons technology battle. As far as fighter aircraft was concerned, the driving force of that battle was speed. With the success of the MiG-15 and 17, the design bureau of Artyom Mikoyan and Mikhail Gurevich leapfrogged its rivals Yakovlev and Lavochkin to a position of eminence in the design of Soviet fighter aircraft. The MiG Bureau had come a long way since its establishment in 1939. Its World War II fighter, the MiG-3, had not been a great success. The jet MiG-15 had won its position against stiff competition because of a combination of performance, strength, and simplicity. The MiG-17 offered more of the same, with greater wing sweep and greater power, but it was still not a supersonic aircraft. The MiG-19 was to be a fighter that could not only exceed Mach 1, but could operate comfortably at supersonic speeds. The step from the subsonic fighters to genuine Mach 1 capability was a big one. It placed great technological demands on the design team. Vasily Arkhipov was the leading engineer for the flight tests of the MiG-19. He says that a truly supersonic fighter became possible because of higher wing sweep angles and the higher thrust of new jets. The MiG-19 was fitted with two Mikulin AM-5 afterburner engines with axial compressors. Unlike the engines of the MiG-15 and 17, they were designed by Russians. By late May 1952, while Joseph Stalin was still alive, the MiG-19 was ready for its first flight. Originally, the horizontal tail surface of the MiG-19 had a conventional elevator. It was discovered in tests that this did not give sufficient control power at transonic speeds, so a one-piece flying tail of the kind pioneered on the American X-1 was fitted. Later prototypes had Mikulin AM-5 engines with about 25% more thrust. In March 1954, a MiG-19 reached Mach 1.33, unofficially breaking the world speed record. But to preserve Soviet secrecy, the record was not claimed. The official record at the time was held by the prototype of this fighter, the North American F-100 Super Sabre. It was the MiG-19's closest American counterpart. The F-100 developed as a fighter bomber and never met the MiG-19 in combat. Comparisons indicate that the MiG-19 would have held its own in speed, climb, and maneuverability, but the F-100 had greater payload, range, and more sophisticated armament. In the mid-50s, American intrusions into Soviet airspace were usually carried out as far as possible from air defense fighter bases. A rocket-assisted version of the MiG-19 was developed as a quick reaction fighter and tested. There was great concern about the G-loading the test pilot, Georgy Shianov, would have to endure. When it was launched successfully in April 1957, the acceleration force on Shianov was 6G. There were more test flights, but the growing success of surface-to-air missiles cancelled out the need for such a radical solution. Shianov was made a hero of the Soviet Union. For the Soviet Air Force, the MiG-19 was a major leap forward in technology, capable not only of operating above the speed of sound, but of carrying air-to-air missiles and using ground control intercept systems. The MiG-19P on display in the Monino Air Force Museum outside Moscow is an all-weather interceptor of the Air Defense Force. Air defense fighters were designed to respond to threats entering Soviet airspace and were stationed widely throughout the Soviet Union. MiG-19Ps were equipped with radar and armed with K-5 missiles. One version of the MiG-19P had the first command link connecting it with ground intercept stations. The link transmitted voice and weapons guidance commands. The twin afterburner engines gave the 19 the power to fly at supersonic speeds. The flying tail, known as a stabilator, gave the control power to cope with instability at those speeds. But on early tests with the flying tail, control below the speed of sound was too sensitive. A phenomenon dreaded by pilots, PIO, pilot-induced oscillation, began to occur. To compensate, a new intelligent control system was developed. Traditionally, pilots resisted the idea of anything intervening between them and the control surfaces, but it was the only way to attack higher Mach numbers and also retain control at slower speeds. With the new irreversible controls, it was difficult to give the pilot a natural feel, so a system was developed using spring loading to give artificial feedback. It was a forerunner of later fly-by-wire control systems. Loss of cabin pressure was a risk. The MiG-19 could fly at high altitudes for long periods of time. This meant that high-altitude combat was a possibility, and also meant that a hit from an opponent could cause a loss of cabin pressure. Pressure suits for fighter pilots became a necessity. For the MiG Design Bureau, the